го влекувањето на стартот на преговорите. Во продолжение во тема на денот разговарам со амбасадорот во земјава Дејвид Гир.
Ambassador Gir, thank you for accepting the invitation to be our guest tonight at the Sitel newscast.
Well, thank you very much, Slavica. I'm very happy to be here.
Macedonia, unfortunately, again did not get the green light for adopting the negotiating framework. A lot of people here are disappointed. We could see that even member countries and our allies, strategic allies, are very disappointed. Are you disappointed, Ambassador?
Of course I'm disappointed. We want to see the opening of negotiations as soon as possible. And you know, the last 15 months have been difficult for everyone. We've had the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's normal that people want to hear some good news. And people understand that the European Union represents the best prospect for prosperity, stability underpinned by democratic principles and the rule of law. So they want to move forward. They want to see the way ahead. But I think it's important that we step back a moment and keep a very clear head, because what is not in doubt, what is not being contested, is the European perspective of North Macedonia. It's clear that it remains the strategic goal of the European Union to see North Macedonia as part of the European Union. And that's not been challenged. In fact, on the contrary, in the Council and across the Member States, we've heard repeatedly a confirmation that this is our strategic goal. So we need to keep a focus on that. And what that means in practice is now we need to continue to engage. In particular, we need to continue to engage. We've seen the Portuguese presidency has put forward a proposal to move forward, and some progress has been made. So we need to work with them and work to achieve this goal. North Macedonia has done its homework, so we also need to deliver.
The Prime Minister assessed that Europe has a problem and it's within the European Union. How do you, what do you say, what do you respond to this criticism?
So the enlargement policy is decisions in that field are taken by unanimity. So quite simply it means it needs 27 member states to agree to move forward. Those are the rules of the game, and you can understand it. Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about inviting a third country to come into the club, sit at the table and make the decisions. So it's an important issue. But where are we? Well, as I've said, we've had a constructive proposal from the Portuguese presidency aiming at taking this forward. Some progress has been made, so we need to continue to engage with them and try to push this across the line. And at the same time, there have been constructive discussions between Sofia and Skopje.
Ambassador, is it possible to change the system and to abolish the obligation for making such decisions unanimously?
I think this is a bit of a distraction. The European Union is constructed in such a way that member states have agreed in certain areas to pool their powers and competencies in the interests of all. And it varies from sector to sector how much power and what the voting rules are. And as I've said, in the area of enlargement, because this is such an important issue, currently the rule is that decisions are taken by unanimity. In theory, that could change, but in order to change, that would also require unanimity, and I don't see that happening in the short term. What we need to do is focus on where the real issues are, which is with the Portuguese presidency's proposal, which will, the efforts will be taken up by Slovenia in the new presidency very shortly, and at the same time, the bilateral relationship between North Macedonia and Bulgaria in order to make progress there. That's where we need to focus rather than discussions about the voting rules, which I can't see changing in any short term.
Yes, I will ask you more about the future dialogue between the two countries, but first I would like to ask you if you have seen the recent polls that showed a significant drop in people's expectations about the integration of the country in the European Union. And it has become kind of a practice that we are raising expectations before each summit, and we're getting disappointed after that, and we're raising expectations again and again. So now all eyes are turned to October. Is this realistic this time?
No, of course I've seen the polls. Why? Because people's opinions are important. We care what people think. The same polls, and particularly the IRI poll recently, showed that nearly 80% of the population understand the value of enlargement and want to see us moving towards that goal. I can understand that as there are these discussions and some delays and disappointment, that the levels of support vary, but the overall support for the goal is very clear. And I would like to add just one thing here. You know, the European Union is here and it's not going away. We're going to continue. I encourage you, I invite you to visit almost any town or any village across the country, and you'll see the support that we're giving to North Macedonia, whether it's on water, roads, railway, economy, civil society. It's there. And that's going to continue. So I think we are very much engaged. Is it realistic? Yes, it is. As I've been saying, the Portuguese presidency has worked hard. Slovenia has indicated that this is a priority, a key priority for it. It will continue that work. And I think we all understand that we need to keep pushing this along to get it across the line, and then we can start the business of the accession negotiations themselves.
You believe that the Portuguese suggestion will still be the framework and it will continue as the basis of discussion during the Slovenian presidency? How do you see the future dialogue between Skopje and Sofia?
I think there are two levels here. You have the efforts made by Portugal and the very constructive proposal it's put on the table. That's on the table, and now Slovenia will pick that up and in the Council and try and take that forward. And I think with the efforts of all, there has been progress and we need to keep that moving. We need to keep the momentum. On the bilateral side, I mean, there's also been constructive efforts in the recent weeks. You've seen a reinvigorating of the contacts, which are very welcome. And you know, we've been calling on the sides to keep talking on the bilateral issue. So we should also recognise that the government here has been constructive, has been sincere in its approach, and has been consistent with the good neighbourly relations approach which we would expect. So it's important that that engagement continues on both sides so that in parallel we can see a resolution to this issue.
Ambassador, how much understanding is there in the European Union about the nature of the dispute between the two countries? And is it in line with the European values to put on the table the history, the language, all the identity issues of one nation that has European aspirations?
I think it's well understood that there are open issues bilaterally. And in situations like this, as has been in the past, we encourage both sides to talk to resolve those issues bilaterally. This is not the first time in the context of accession that there have been bilateral issues which have been resolved and where you have seen the countries concerned become EU member states. So I'm confident that this can be resolved, and we can also see a similar pattern which will result in North Macedonia becoming a European Union member state.
As you said, Macedonia has met all conditions for starting the negotiations, except for this dispute, but it's still far away from reaching the standards of the EU member states. How realistic is that we're going to do that by ourselves if there is no negotiation framework? And how do you assess the reform process that has been ongoing?
Look, reform is absolutely crucial. As I said, North Macedonia has done its homework so that it's there. We want to open negotiations, so it's reached the starting line. But the path to the European Union is one of reform. Every step on reform that is done by North Macedonia is a step closer to the European Union. And you know, it's not just a question of the accession process. Reform is in the interests of citizens. No country, I think, has the luxury of saying we're not going to engage in reform. We're in the process of some incredible transformational processes. We have the green revolution, we have the digital revolution, we have the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Governments can either embrace the reform, engage with it, take the opportunities, or be pushed into it anyway. And we are engaging very extensively with the authorities on reform. We're providing assistance, and we'll continue to do so. Provide approximately, as I've said, 100 million euros a year in support, and that will continue. So we will accompany the reform process in the interests of the citizens, but also because each step in reform is a step closer to the European Union, a step towards becoming a member state.
In the past, due to the slim majority in Parliament, we have seen how different legislation, not necessarily known to the public as part of the reform process, is going to Parliament with the European Union flag. I know that you're not being asked about it and you're not directly in charge of that whole process, but are you monitoring it in some way? And have you ever had anything to object to the government about this procedure?
So you're exactly right. We don't comment on the specific cases of EU flagging. So a law is EU flagged because it's touching on the standards of the European Union, what we call the EU acquis. So we don't comment on the specific cases. Nonetheless, of course, we follow very closely. We follow all reform steps very closely. And what's important to us is that any fast-track procedure should be used with caution. It's very important that there is good democratic scrutiny and transparency of legislation. It makes for good legislation, and so this process should not prevent that. And as you'll have seen in our country report last October, we commented on this point, but in general terms, as you said.
Both the European Union and Macedonia have faced serious challenges during the previous 15 months with the pandemics. How do you assess the support by the European Union to the region? And do you have a feeling that there has been some delay, due to which vaccines from other markets became more dominant in this region of the Western Balkans?
Let's roll back to the beginning. The European Union was very quickly there at the beginning of the pandemic, providing medical equipment and protective equipment, and we've continued to do that throughout the pandemic. And talking to the government, we recognized very quickly that jobs were at risk, businesses were going to go to the wall. So what we did, we provided financial assistance to help them manage and to make sure that those jobs were not lost, and in particular to help some of the most vulnerable groups, young people and women. And then, like every country affected by the pandemic, revenues, because the economy has been affected, revenues dropped, and there was a closing of the fiscal space. So what did we do? We put 160 million euros of macro financial assistance on the table and have provided that again. So once again, we're very active. And we used all the tools that we've been using for our own member states in following the development of the pandemic in the Western Balkans as well. And we did one more thing. We've had very extensive discussions on a very ambitious recovery plan for the European Union. But we included the Western Balkans in that reflection. And last October, the Commissioner for Enlargement came to Skopje and the Western Balkans and announced an economic and investment plan worth some 8 billion euros, but leveraging up to 29 billion euros. It's a huge investment. So that's the support. The point about this is this is not a short sprint. This is a long distance run, and we are accompanying every step of the way. Now on vaccines. I won't hide from you. I mean, you follow the news, of course, and you will have seen that in February, March, there were difficulties in European Union member states themselves in ensuring vaccines for their own population because of difficulties in supply. But as soon as those were overcome, the European Union came forward and started to also ensure vaccines for the region as well. And we now, between now and August, have provided 625,000 doses of vaccines, including 120,000 for North Macedonia. Member states have provided additional ones and will be providing more in the future. So, as I say, during this long distance run, because it's going to last for quite a while, we will be there every step of the way. And can I just say one last thing on vaccines, because as I've got you at the moment, you know, one of the big lessons we've learned from the pandemic is that it doesn't respect borders. We're in this together. But also, to exit this, we're in this together. And that's why it's so important that people get vaccinated. if you've not vaccinated, please go ahead. Please register yourself for vaccination. I've done it, because it's only by ensuring a certain level of vaccination across the country that we can beat this virus, and both within North Macedonia, the Western Balkans, and the European Union.
Ambassador, thank you for being our guest tonight.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.